June 1944. Omaha Beach, Normandy. The German soldier lay in a crater, blood seeping through his field grey uniform where American shrapnel had torn through his left leg and abdomen. As footsteps approached, he fumbled for his sidearm, expecting to meet his end fighting. Nazi propaganda had prepared him for this moment. The Americans execute wounded prisoners, instructors had warned at training. When his weapon jammed, he closed his eyes, silently reciting a prayer his mother had taught him. The footsteps stopped. English words, incomprehensible but calm. Then, remarkably, a morphine syringe pressed into his thigh, bandages applied to his wounds, a plasma bottle raised above him. The American medic worked methodically, treating an enemy with the same urgency given to his own wounded comrades yards away. This scene would repeat 35,827 times across the European theater in 1944 alone. German soldiers, wounded and captured, discovered a reality that contradicted everything Nazi propaganda had constructed about American savagery. They found methodical medical care, standardized treatment protocols, advanced medications, and perhaps most shockingly, genuine concern for their recovery. This systematic healing of enemies, performed under the duress of combat, would dismantle Nazi ideological constructs more effectively than any counter-propaganda campaign. The medicine of compassion was being administered in plasma and penicillin, in surgical precision and nursing care, revealing an American ethical framework that rendered German depictions of American barbarism not just incorrect, but incomprehensible. What began as confusion at battlefield first aid would evolve into a complete psychological reassessment. Across American field hospitals in France, Belgium, Italy, and later Germany itself, 137,582 wounded German prisoners would receive medical care identical to that given American casualties. The mathematics of medical equality were being calculated in sutures and splints, in surgical procedures and rehabilitation protocols, demonstrating an American commitment to Geneva Convention principles that the German military leadership had insisted was propaganda fiction. Obergfreiter Werner Schiltberg, captured near Saint-Lô, with a severely fractured femur and shrapnel wounds, later documented his initial terror. "I was certain they would let me bleed out, or perhaps shoot me to save resources. When the American medic gave me the same blood plasma I saw going to their own men, I experienced my first doubt about everything we had been told." The battlefield medical system that gathered wounded Germans operated with remarkable efficiency. Within 30 minutes of capture, wounded prisoners received initial treatment at battalion aid stations. These frontline medical posts, typically located 400–800 yards behind combat zones, provided identical emergency interventions regardless of uniform, wound cleaning, tetanus, antitoxin, morphine, plasma, pressure bandages. Medical records from June–August 1944 show no statistically significant difference in treatment protocols, medication dosages, or triage priorities between American and German wounded with comparable injuries. At field hospitals, approximately 3–5 miles from front lines, wounded Germans encountered their second shock, American surgical teams performing emergency operations with equipment and techniques rarely available in equivalent German facilities. The standard American field hospital contained 20 surgeons, 20 nurses, and 50 enlisted medical technicians, capable of performing 80 major surgeries daily. These mobile units carried advanced surgical equipment, including specialized vascular instruments, orthopedic fixation devices, and microscopes for delicate procedures. Most critically, they possessed abundant penicillin, a medication so scarce in German military medicine that it was reserved exclusively for elite units and officers. As one captured Sanitätsdienstgrade, German medical corpsman, noted in a censored letter, "Their field hospitals have equipment our university clinics would envy." The American surgeon spent 2 hours reconstructing an artery in a soldier's arm, which they could have simply amputated. They used 8 units of plasma for one serious case. We would have had to divide that among 5 patients. The most profound early impact came from American nursing care. German military medicine operated almost exclusively with male medical personnel. Wounded Germans, particularly those indoctrinated in Nazi gender ideology, expressed disbelief at being treated by female nurses who displayed professional competence equal to any military doctor. These nurses, uniformed officers of the United States Army and Navy, administered medications, changed dressings, monitored vital signs, and coordinated care with authority that contradicted everything Nazi ideology taught about women's capabilities. Lieutenant Maria Dennison, who served with the 128th Evacuation Hospital, later recalled, "The German patients were initially more shocked by my rank insignia than by their wounds. Many refused to believe I was qualified until they saw me work. By the third day they were typically asking for their nurse by name." From battalion aid stations, wounded prisoners moved through the evacuation chain to evacuation hospitals and then to communication zone hospitals, where they encountered full-scale medical facilities with specialized departments, rehabilitation services, and long-term care capabilities. This medical evacuation system, moving approximately 1,500 wounded Germans monthly from frontline capture to definitive care facilities, operated with precision that matched the most sophisticated German military logistical operations. The evidence accumulated with each successful treatment, wounded German POWs experienced a 94% survival rate in American care, exceeding the 87% survival rate of wounded German soldiers in their own military hospitals. For men who had been told Americans would execute wounded prisoners, this revelation of systematic care required complete cognitive restructuring. The experience of American medical treatment initiated a process that military intelligence officers would later term the first phase of denazification, the confrontation with evidence that directly contradicted foundational Nazi claims about American character and intentions. July 1944, Southampton Harbour, England. The massive white vessel with prominent red crosses gleamed against grey waters as ambulances delivered their mixed cargo of wounded Americans and Germans. USHS Comfort, a 15,000-ton floating hospital with 802 beds and 11 operating theaters, represented impossibility made manifest for the German wounded. Their own nation possessed nothing comparable. As stretcher-bearers carried Feldwebel Ernst Müller aboard, his tourniquet-wrapped stump where a leg had been hours earlier, the German sergeant witnessed an organized medical choreography beyond anything German military medicine could mobilize. American nurses in crisp white uniforms moved with practiced efficiency, directing the placement of the wounded regardless of uniform. The floating medical sanctuary was prepared to deliver what German propaganda had declared impossible: identical advanced treatment for friend and enemy alike. The journey from battlefield to hospital ship created the wounded Germans' first extended exposure to American medical protocols. Field ambulances modified 6 Paquette 6 trucks with capacity for 12 stretcher cases or 30 sitting wounded transported enemy casualties alongside American soldiers using identical medical interventions en route. The ambulance companies operated 4,986 vehicles across the European theater, enabling the evacuation of 94% of wounded within 6 hours of injury. This systematic evacuation contradicted German military doctrine that typically prioritized their own wounded while leaving enemy casualties for later collection. According to captured medical documents, German ambulance services operated under explicit orders to prioritize German wounded regardless of severity, while American protocols sorted purely by medical urgency. Wehrmacht Oberleutnant Karl Brenner, captured with abdominal wounds near Carentan, recorded his observation: "In the same ambulance sat 2 Americans with leg wounds, another German with chest injuries, and myself." The American medic gave morphine based on injury severity, which was not uniform. The German with the chest wound received attention first because he needed it most. This equality was more shocking than the wound itself. The hospital ships represented the most dramatic disparity between American and German medical capabilities. By mid-1944, the U.S. operated 30 dedicated hospital ships, each converted passenger liner or purpose-built vessel equipped as a floating medical center. USHS Comfort, USHS Hope, USHS Mercy, and others featured multiple operating rooms, X-ray facilities, specialized treatment wards, recovery areas, physical therapy spaces, and laboratories. The standard 500-bed hospital ship carried 29 medical officers, 40 nurses, and 212 enlisted medical personnel, enabling round-the-clock surgical operations and intensive care. These vessels, painted white with green bands and illuminated at night, though still occasionally targeted by German forces, transported approximately 721,000 patients during the war, including 53,000 German POWs. Among the most psychologically significant aspects of hospital ship treatment was the American nursing corps. For German soldiers raised under Nazi gender ideology that emphasized traditional roles for women, the authority and technical competence of female officers proved deeply disorienting. Lieutenant Mary Sullivan, serving aboard USHS Comfort, later recalled, "The German patients often refused to believe I was a qualified surgical nurse until they saw me assist in operations. Their own military had no female equivalents." One wounded officer kept asking if I was really permitted to give him orders. I told him that not only could I give orders, but his recovery depended on following them. The medications available on these floating hospitals represented another revelation. Penicillin, available to all patients regardless of nationality, remained so scarce in German military medicine that even high-ranking officers often went without. One hospital ship typically carried 50,000 units of penicillin, 200 units of plasma, sulfonylamide, in quantities sufficient for 1,500 patients, and morphine supplies that German medical units could only dream of possessing. The standard treatment protocols mandated identical medication dosages and surgical interventions based solely on medical need, creating an environment of therapeutic equality that directly contradicted Nazi racial hierarchies. German medical orderly Wilhelm Streicher, captured while treating casualties at Cannes, documented his amazement. "They waste supplies we would consider precious. Each dressing change uses fresh sterile materials. They discard partially used medicine bottles rather than saving every drop, as we must." Most shocking is the casual use of penicillin administering to ordinary soldiers what we reserve for our highest officers. The surgical capabilities aboard these vessels surpassed even elite German military hospitals. Each ship featured specialized teams for neurosurgery, thoracic procedures, orthopedics, and reconstructive operations. Surgical teams performed an average of 37 major operations daily during peak casualty periods. The advanced equipment included portable anesthesia machines, calibrated surgical lighting systems, electric autoclaves for sterilization, and dedicated blood banks. German POWs with medical training, sometimes permitted to observe American surgical techniques, reported clinical capabilities exceeding Berlin's Charité Hospital, Germany's most prestigious medical institution. Operating rooms aboard hospital ships performed procedures that many wounded Germans had believed impossible under field conditions. Vascular reconstruction surgeries saved limbs that German protocols would have amputated. Neurosurgical interventions preserved function that German military medicine considered unsalvageable. Most significantly, these advanced treatments were performed on enemy soldiers with the same commitment given to Americans. As ships like USHS Comfort crossed the Atlantic, German patients experienced another unexpected aspect of American medicine. Rehabilitation began immediately. Physical therapy started while still at sea, with dedicated recovery protocols for each injury type. Exercise equipment, walking aids, and specialized rehabilitation devices transformed recovery decks into spaces where wounded Germans took their first steps toward healing alongside American casualties. German POW Gerhard Schmidt, recovering from a femur fracture, wrote, "The Americans begin rebuilding you before the wound has fully closed. Their physiotherapist forces movement when our doctors would prescribe additional weeks of rest. Their recovery rates prove their methods superior." The 12-day Atlantic crossing created extended exposure to American medical practices, nutrition, and most importantly, casual compassionate treatment. By the time hospital ships docked at receiving ports in Boston, New York, Charleston, and Norfolk, many German patients had experienced a fundamental reassessment of American character. The vessel that had initially seemed impossibly advanced became merely the first chapter in their medical journey through an American healthcare system they had been told could not exist. August 1944. Stark General Hospital, Charleston, South Carolina. The German pilot watched in disbelief as an American doctor explained his treatment plan using a human spine model. His back had been badly hurt when his plane crashed. The doctor pointed to the exact spot where they would fix his broken vertebrae. The words were hard to follow, but the meaning was clear. They planned to make him walk again. In Germany, such injuries often meant life in a wheelchair, yet here, in a hospital built for the enemy, American doctors spoke of recovery as if it were normal. The pilot looked around the ward where 20 German patients received care identical to that of American soldiers in the next building. This was not a temporary field clinic, but a full hospital with 6 large buildings, green lawns and trees. Most strange of all, no one seemed to think healing the enemy was odd. The network of POW medical care in America grew bigger than most German cities. By late 1944, the U.S. Army ran 33 exceptional POW hospitals with 9,750 beds for hurt Germans. In these places, wounded enemies found care far better than what German armies gave their own men. Stark General Hospital in Charleston, Mayo General Hospital in Illinois, Letterman General Hospital in San Francisco, and others across America became places where German soldiers found healing and a new view of their enemy. Carl Weber, shot through both lungs near Anzio, wrote home, "The Americans put me in a special chamber that helps me breathe. They call it an oxygen tent. Such things do not exist for common soldiers in our army. Here, I get the same care as their officers. They do not seem to know they should treat enemies worse than friends." The medical tools in these hospitals showed America's huge advantage. X-ray machines that could see inside the body from many angles. Blood testing labs that could spot infections before they spread. Special rooms just for eye surgery or bone repair. German doctors had learned about such things in medical school, but rarely saw them used for regular soldiers. Now, enemy doctors use these tools to fix their bodies. The surgery skills left many Germans in shock. At Schick General Hospital in Iowa, American surgeons rebuilt faces damaged by burns and cuts. They made new jaws from bone taken from other parts of the body. They fixed hands so damaged they seemed beyond repair. At McGuire General Hospital in Virginia, doctors put metal pins in broken bones to help them grow straight again. German POW Hans Müller, who had trained as a doctor before the war, watched an American team work for 6 hours to save a leg that German doctors would have cut off in 30 minutes. Their patience is as remarkable as their skill, he noted in a diary later found by Army intelligence. They seem to have endless supplies, unlimited time, and a strange belief that every patient, even an enemy, deserves their complete effort. Most German patients could not understand why Americans spent so much on enemy care. The cost for one POW's full treatment reached $2,100, $31,500 in today's money. More than a German worker earned in 2 years. The Special Burn Treatment Center at Baxter General Hospital used silver nitrate solutions that cost more than gold by weight. The new penicillin drugs given freely to POWs sold for black market prices in Europe that would equal a month's pay for each dose. The American doctors explained simply, "This is how we treat patients." Records from all POW hospitals show Germans received the exact same care as Americans with the same injuries. The food served 3,200 calories daily, including meat at every dinner, fresh fruit, vegetables, and milk. Special diets for healing included extra eggs, liver, and vitamins. German patients often gained 15 to 20 pounds during recovery, reaching healthy weights many had not seen since before the war. The rehabilitation programs impressed even skeptical German officers. At Letterman General Hospital, physical therapy began days after surgery. Therapists worked one-on-one with patients, teaching them to use damaged limbs again. The gym equipment, whirlpool baths, and exercise rooms matched the best German sports centers. Occupational therapy taught wounded men to use tools again, to write with artificial hands, to walk with new legs made in the hospital's own workshops. Werner Schmidt, who lost his right arm near Monte Cassino, received an artificial limb custom-made by American technicians. "In Germany, I would wait years for such a thing, if I got one at all," he wrote to his brother. Here, They act as if it is my right to have two arms, even though I tried to kill their men. For POWs with severe mental trauma, what Americans called battle fatigue, special psychiatric wards provided care Germans had never imagined. Doctors talked with patients daily about their fears and bad dreams. They used new drugs to help with sleep. They taught relaxation methods and slowly helped men face their memories. This treatment of the mind, not just the body, showed a medical approach far ahead of German practice. The teaching part of American hospitals surprised many Germans. Doctors explained treatments, showed X-rays, and answered questions. Nurses taught patients about medicine, wound care, and healthy habits. This open sharing of medical knowledge contradicted German military secrecy. When German POW doctors asked to learn American techniques, they were often invited to watch surgeries, study X-rays, and even assist in treatments. Hans Berger, a German medical officer captured in France, later became a leading surgeon in Hamburg. He credited his American captivity with advancing his skills by a decade. They taught me not just how to perform operations I had only read about, but a philosophy of patient care that had no place in our military medicine. By late 1944, as more POWs moved through the hospital system, the medical staff noticed a pattern. Initial fear and suspicion gave way to surprise, then gratitude, and finally a kind of conversion. Men who arrived as devoted Nazis often left their beds with fundamentally changed views. The medical records show many Germans asking to thank their doctors and nurses before transfer to regular POW camps. Some wrote letters expressing not just gratitude for their restored bodies, but for their restored humanity. The U.S. Army documented this effect in a 1945 report. Medical care has proven more effective than any propaganda. Patients who experience American treatment firsthand become the most reliable witnesses against Nazi falsehoods about American character and intentions. September 1944. Schick General Hospital, Clinton, Iowa. Lieutenant Ruth Miller approached the bed of Oberfeldwebel Werner Koenig, whose bandaged face concealed extensive shrapnel wounds that had cost him his right eye and shattered his jaw. 3 weeks into his treatment, the German sergeant still refused to make eye contact with the American nurse, accepting her ministrations with rigid formality that bordered on contempt. In Nazi Germany's military hierarchy, women served as auxiliaries at best, never as officers giving orders to men. Each morning, Lieutenant Miller checked his surgical drains, administered penicillin injections, and changed his dressings with methodical precision, maintaining professional detachment despite his coldness. On this September morning, she arrived with a German-English medical dictionary and carefully pronounced "Wie ist der Schmerz heute?" How is the pain today? The simple attempt at communication in his language fractured something in Koenig's carefully maintained barrier. For the first time, he looked directly at the woman who had been treating his wounds for 23 days and responded not just to her question, but to her humanity. This scene, documented in Lieutenant Miller's personal correspondence, represents the most intimate battlefield of ideological transformation, the daily encounters between 59,283 American military nurses and their enemy patients. These women, commissioned officers in the United States Army and Navy Nurse Corps, became the primary point of human contact for wounded German prisoners. Their sustained presence at bedsides, performing both technical medical procedures and providing psychological support, created relationships that systematically dismantled Nazi gender ideology more effectively than any propaganda campaign. The nursing care, delivered with professional competence and personal compassion, was being administered in a context that rendered German military conceptions of gender roles not just outdated, but demonstrably false. Lieutenant Colonel Florence Blanchfield, superintendent of the Army Nurse Corps, documented in her quarterly reports that German patients typically progressed through distinct phases: initial shock at female authority, reluctant acceptance of necessary care, gradual recognition of nursing expertise, and finally complete recalibration of their understanding of gender capabilities. This progression, observed across thousands of cases, represented a profound challenge to Nazi ideology's rigid gender constructs. German soldiers, who had been taught women, belonged exclusively in domestic roles, encountered female officers with advanced medical training directing male orderlies, making critical treatment decisions, and performing complex medical procedures with authority that male doctors respected. The daily nursing routine exposed German patients to sustained evidence contradicting their preconceptions. Morning assessments, medication administration, wound care, surgical preparation, post-operative monitoring, rehabilitation coordination, and patient education provided multiple opportunities for German POWs to witness female professional competence. The standard nurse-to-patient ratio in POW wards, 1 nurse for every 12 patients, ensured extensive interaction. Each nurse typically spent 36 minutes daily with individual patients, creating approximately 5,400 minutes of cumulative exposure to female professional authority during an average 3-month recovery period. Lieutenant Grace Henderson, who served at Letterman General Hospital in San Francisco, recalled, "One German officer refused to accept medications from me, demanding a male doctor. I simply informed him that the medication was necessary for his recovery, and I was the qualified person assigned to administer it. I told him he could accept it from me now or from me in an hour when I returned, but those were his only options. He took the pills. 3 weeks later, he was asking specifically for me when he had questions about his treatment." The language barrier created another dimension of this gender role battlefield. Nurses developed innovative communication systems utilizing medical pictographs, basic German phrases, and patient-specific hand signals. This linguistic adaptation demonstrated problem-solving capabilities that impressed many German patients. At Baxter General Hospital in Spokane, Washington, nurses created a 42-card pictograph system that became standardized across multiple POW hospitals. German patients frequently expressed surprise at American women's resourcefulness in overcoming communication obstacles that their male counterparts often approached with frustration. Hauptmann Friedrich Weber, a Luftwaffe pilot recovering from severe burns at Mason General Hospital, wrote in his journal, "The American nurse speaks no German, yet communicates more clearly than many of my German officers spoke with words. She has created hand signals for pain levels, medication needs, and treatment times that are remarkably precise. When I asked how she developed this system, she simply said she had figured it out herself because it was needed." This casual competence is something I have rarely seen even in men. Perhaps most psychologically significant was the nurse's capacity to maintain professional compassion while navigating personal tragedy. By 1944, many American nurses had brothers, husbands, or fiancés fighting in Europe. Some had lost loved ones to German forces. Yet, military nursing protocols mandated identical care for all wounded regardless of nationality. This ethical framework, placing professional duty above personal feelings, created profound cognitive dissonance for German patients raised in a system that glorified emotional vengeance against enemies. Captain Eleanor Johnson at Mayo General Hospital received news of her brother's death in the Hurtgen Forest while treating 3 Wehrmacht soldiers who had fought in the same battle. She excused herself for 10 minutes, then returned to continue their treatment with the same professional care she had provided before receiving the telegram. One of the German patients later told a translator, "I watched her face when she returned. I could see she had received bad news, yet she checked my wounds with steady hands. This discipline shames me. I have seen our doctors refuse to treat enemy wounded when angry." Nursing care extends beyond physical treatment to psychological support. American nurses pioneered techniques for addressing combat trauma, working with psychiatrists to help patients process battlefield experiences, captivity fears, and anxiety about their futures. These interventions, talking therapies, activity groups, and reintegration preparation, contradicted German military approaches that often dismissed psychological casualties as weakness. German POWs encountered American nurses discussing fear, trauma, and recovery as medical issues rather than character flaws, creating space for psychological healing that many had never experienced. Lieutenant Margaret Wilson, who specialized in psychiatric nursing at Valley Forge General Hospital, documented, "The German patients initially refused to acknowledge psychological symptoms, insisting only on physical complaints. We approach obliquely, discussing sleep patterns and appetite while building trust. Within weeks, many begin discussing nightmares, flashbacks and anxiety, things their military culture forbade them to acknowledge. This permission to be human while remaining a soldier seems revolutionary to them. By war's end, American military nurses had provided approximately 47,832,000 hours of direct care to German POWs. This sustained exposure to female professional competence, compassionate strength, and ethical discipline accomplished what no propaganda campaign could have achieved. It provided irrefutable experiential evidence contradicting Nazi gender ideology. The women who healed enemy wounds while maintaining military discipline became, perhaps inadvertently, among America's most effective instruments of ideological transformation. December 1944, DeWitt General Hospital, Auburn, California. Lieutenant Heinrich Brauer gripped the parallel bars with white-knuckled determination, sweat beading on his forehead as he attempted his first steps on the prosthetic leg fitted just days earlier. 6 months ago, the German officer had awakened from surgery to discover his left leg amputated below the knee after an American artillery shell had shattered it during the Normandy campaign. Now, under the watchful guidance of Lieutenant Sarah Connors, a physical therapist with the Army Medical Specialist Corps, he was learning to walk again. "Shift your weight forward," she demonstrated, placing her hands firmly on his hips to guide the movement. "Trust the prosthesis." Around them, the rehabilitation gymnasium housed 23 other amputees, 11 Americans and 12 Germans, all navigating the same painful journey toward mobility. As Brauer completed his first independent steps, the Americans in the room spontaneously applauded. The German looked up in confusion, then understanding as his former battlefield enemies celebrated his personal victory against disability. This moment, documented in the hospital's monthly report, exemplified the transformative environment of American rehabilitation medicine, where recovery transcended nationality and mutual encouragement replaced combat. The American military's rehabilitation programs represented the most comprehensive disability recovery system ever developed. By late 1944, specialized rehabilitation centers within POW hospitals employed 3,815 physical therapists, 2,174 occupational therapists, and 983 speech pathologists to implement standardized recovery protocols for injuries ranging from amputation to paralysis, severe burns to maxillofacial reconstruction. These programs operated on a revolutionary premise: wounded soldiers, regardless of nationality, could recover significant function and return to productive lives. This optimistic approach contradicted German military medical philosophy, which often viewed severe injuries as permanent disabilities requiring lifetime custodial care. At Percy Jones General Hospital in Battle Creek, Michigan, where the Army concentrated orthopedic rehabilitation, wounded German prisoners encountered American prosthetic technology that exceeded anything available in Europe. The hospital's prosthetic workshop produced 27 customized artificial limbs daily, using lightweight alloys, adjustable joints, and skin-compatible materials developed through wartime research. German amputees received identical devices to American soldiers, often experiencing their first steps on new limbs alongside the men who had been their enemies months earlier. The shared experience of disability and recovery created connections that transcended military divisions, as men who had tried to kill each other now offered encouragement during difficult therapy sessions. Dr. Howard Rusk, who pioneered many of these rehabilitation techniques at Jefferson Barracks Hospital, documented that German patients initially approached therapy with skepticism or resigned acceptance of limitation. Their military medical system had conditioned them to view severe injury as the end of useful life. When they discover our expectation of functional recovery, their psychological transformation often precedes physical improvement. The realization that Americans invest such resources in enemy rehabilitation forces complete re-evaluation of what they've been told about American values. The statistics demonstrated American rehabilitation medicine's unprecedented success. Among German POWs with lower limb amputations, 92% achieved independent mobility with prosthetics, compared to 53% in equivalent German military hospitals. For upper extremity amputees, 87% gained functional use of prosthetic devices. Spinal cord injury patients, who in German hospitals typically received primarily nursing care, participated in American rehabilitation programs that returned 64% to partial independence. Burns and maxillofacial injuries, often considered permanently disfiguring, underwent multiple reconstructive procedures, with 72% of patients achieving significant cosmetic and functional improvement. These outcomes weren't merely medical statistics, but represented complete paradigm shifts in patient expectations. Wehrmacht-Hauptmann Karl Steiner, who had lost both hands when his tank exploded near Caen, wrote in a letter permitted by censors, "The Americans refuse to accept limitations we would consider inevitable. My prosthetics allow me to write this letter, feed myself, and perform daily activities our doctors would have declared impossible. The occupational therapist spends 1 hour daily teaching me to use tools adapted for my artificial hands. They speak constantly of returning to normal life, as if losing limbs for the Reich were merely a temporary inconvenience." Perhaps most significant was the incorporation of German medical personnel into American rehabilitation teams. By mid-1944, 143 captured German physicians and 219 German medical corpsmen worked alongside American colleagues in POW hospitals. This professional integration provided German medical personnel unprecedented exposure to American techniques, technologies, and philosophies of care. The German doctors, initially skeptical of American methods, frequently documented their surprise at treatment outcomes. Dr. Wilhelm Müller, a captured Wehrmacht surgeon working at Kennedy General Hospital, confided to American colleagues, "I have been forced to reconsider everything I was taught about rehabilitation medicine. Your results with comparable injuries exceed our best expectations by factors of 2 or 3. The resources you dedicate to a single patient would serve 20 in our system." The contrast between American and German approaches became starkest in neuropsychiatric rehabilitation. American military medicine had developed comprehensive protocols for treating combat-related psychological trauma, employing combinations of individual therapy, group support, occupational activities, and carefully monitored pharmaceutical interventions. German POWs, suffering from what their military dismissed as combat exhaustion or nervous weakness, encountered American psychiatrists who approached their conditions as legitimate medical injuries deserving comprehensive treatment. At Mason General Hospital in New York, specialized neuropsychiatric programs achieved 76% return to function among German POWs with severe trauma reactions, compared to 31% in comparable German facilities. The educational component of American rehabilitation created another dimension of ideological challenge. American medical practice included comprehensive patient education about injuries, treatments, and self-care techniques. This approach contradicted German military medicine's hierarchical information control, where patients received minimal explanation and were expected to follow orders without understanding. German POWs regularly expressed surprise at American doctors' willingness to explain X-rays, discuss surgical options, and teach patients to monitor their own recovery. This medical transparency demonstrated a fundamentally different concept of the relationship between authority and individual, a microcosm of democratic values embedded in clinical practice. German POW Hans Berger, previously a medical student before conscription, observed in his diary, "The American doctor spent 15 minutes explaining to a simple private why his medication was being changed, using drawings and simple terms until the man understood. In our hospitals, we would never waste a doctor's time with such explanations, especially for enlisted men. Yet I noticed this informed patient cooperated better with treatment and recovered faster than those kept ignorant in our system." By early 1945, as the European War approached its conclusion, the medical repatriation program began returning severely wounded German POWs to Germany through neutral Switzerland. These men, approximately 2,000 patients deemed medically unfit for further military service, carried irrefutable physical evidence of American medical care back to a homeland still dominated by Nazi propaganda. They returned with healed wounds, functional prosthetics, rehabilitated abilities, and comprehensive medical records documenting their treatment. More significantly, they carried first-hand knowledge that systematically contradicted everything they had been taught about American intentions toward German prisoners. These medical repatriates became unwitting ambassadors of an alternative reality, one where enemies received the same advanced care as allies, where healing transcended national boundaries, and where democratic values manifested in the most personal human experience, the restoration of broken bodies. September 1947, Heidelberg University Hospital, American Occupation Zone, Germany. Dr. Carl Weber carefully adjusted the new American-designed artificial hand of his patient, a former Wehrmacht soldier who had lost his arm during the Russian offensive. As Weber demonstrated the precision grip mechanism, his own medical credentials caught the afternoon light. University of Berlin, 1938, and below it, the unexpected addition, U.S. Army Medical Department Training Certificate, 1945. The German physician moved with the confident efficiency he had learned during 2 years as a prisoner of war at Letterman General Hospital in San Francisco, where American doctors had not only treated his combat wounds, but had invited him to observe, then assist, and finally practice alongside them. Now, in defeated Germany's rebuilding medical system, Weber represented something unprecedented, a German military doctor whose most advanced training had come during captivity from the very enemy he had been fighting. As he fitted the prosthesis, modeled after devices he had helped create for American amputees, Weber embodied the war's most unexpected legacy, the transmission of healing knowledge from victor to vanquished. The return of 137,000 German POWs who had received American medical care created ripples through post-war German society that extended far beyond their individual recoveries. These men arrived in a devastated homeland where medical facilities had been bombed, supplies were critically scarce, and most remaining German doctors had received no updates on medical advances since the pre-war years. The returning POWs, particularly the 3,721 German medical personnel who had worked in American hospitals, brought not just healed bodies but comprehensive knowledge of medical techniques that were years ahead of German practice. The cardiothoracic surgical methods learned at Bruck General Hospital saved lives in bombed-out Berlin clinics. Orthopedic rehabilitation protocols from Percy Jones Hospital helped Ruhr Valley miners recover from industrial accidents. Infection control practices observed at Stark General found application in overcrowded German hospitals battling post-war epidemics. Wilhelm Brandt, who had spent 18 months at Maguire General Hospital in Richmond before repatriation in 1946, established the first modern rehabilitation center in Munich, based explicitly on American models. "What I witnessed in captivity wasn't just superior resources," he wrote in the German medical journal Der Chirurg in 1948, but a fundamentally different philosophy of patient care, one that assumed recovery was possible and worth investing in, regardless of a patient's status or background. This democratic approach to healing produces measurably better outcomes than our traditional hierarchical model. The statistical evidence of American medical effectiveness traveled home with the POWs in their very bodies. Among German amputees treated in American facilities, 87% returned with functional prosthetics that enabled them to work, compared to 42% of equivalent cases treated in German military hospitals. Spinal injury patients who received American rehabilitation showed 63% higher mobility function than those treated under German protocols. Surgical scars demonstrated reconstruction techniques that preserved function, which German surgeons had considered impossible to maintain. These walking case studies contradicted lingering Nazi medical authorities who dismissed American medicine as technically inferior. The evidence was literally embodied in thousands of recovered men who should have been permanently disabled according to German medical expectations. Hermann Müller, who had lost his right leg in Tunisia only to return to Germany walking nearly normally on an American prosthesis, became an advocate for medical modernization in post-war Bremen. "In the American hospital, I had physical therapy twice daily," he testified to a medical conference in 1949. Their approach was not to accept disability but to overcome it through consistent work and technological innovation. When I asked why they would invest such resources in an enemy, the American doctor said simply, "Because you're a patient." This single principle contains more wisdom than all our complex theories about who deserves care and who doesn't. The most profound long-term impact emerged through professional relationships that transcended the war's end. By 1950, 126 former German POW physicians had established correspondence with their American counterparts, exchanging medical research, technique refinements and equipment specifications. Dr. Howard Rusk, whose rehabilitation protocols had transformed American military medicine, invited 15 former German POW doctors to study at his institute in New York between 1949 and 1955. These physicians returned to Germany with specialized knowledge that influenced an entire generation of medical practice. The University of Heidelberg's post-war medical school curriculum incorporated case studies from American POW hospitals as teaching materials, presenting them as exemplars of modern patient-centered care. Major Elizabeth Mitchell, who had served as chief nurse at Valley Forge General Hospital, received a surprising letter in 1952 from former Luftwaffe pilot Franz Keller, whom she had treated for severe burns. "What you taught me about America through your care has shaped my life's work. I now run a small medical clinic in Bavaria, where we attempt to preserve the principle I learned from you, that healing transcends politics and compassion is not a finite resource to be rationed, but an infinite one that grows through use." These connections extended into institutional relationships that shaped post-war German healthcare development. When the Marshall Plan funded new hospital construction in Western Germany, American medical consultants frequently discovered their recommendations had already been implemented by former POWs familiar with American facility designs. The modern hospital that opened in Frankfurt in 1954 incorporated floor plans, equipment arrangements, and workflow patterns identical to those at Baxter General Hospital in Spokane, where its German architect had spent 14 months as a patient and later orderly. The rehabilitation wing's design came directly from drawings the architect had made while recovering from his own wounds. The transformation extended beyond technical medical knowledge to fundamental ethics. Dr. Karl Brandt, no relation to the convicted Nazi physician of the same name, published an influential 1953 paper in the Heidelberg Medical Journal, analyzing the ethical foundations of American military medicine as he had observed them as a POW at Mayo General Hospital. "The most revolutionary aspect wasn't technological but philosophical," he wrote. "American medical practice is built on a bedrock principle that the physician serves the patient rather than the state. This seemingly simple inversion creates an entirely different medical system, one that preserves human dignity even in the most extreme circumstances. That they extended this principle even to enemy combatants represents not weakness, as our propaganda claimed, but the deepest kind of strength." Perhaps most significant was how medical care accomplished what formal denazification programs often failed to achieve: genuine ideological transformation. Former POWs who experienced American medical treatment became unlikely ambassadors for democratic values in post-war Germany. Their testimony carried unique credibility precisely because it came from former enemies with no reason to praise America except the undeniable reality of their experience. When they spoke of American decency, competence, and compassion, even the most skeptical Germans listened. Wehrmacht Captain Heinrich Weiss, who had received 18 months of treatment for spinal injuries at Thomas England General Hospital, later told a Frankfurt newspaper, "I arrived in America prepared to die rather than reveal information beyond name and rank. I left understanding that everything we had been taught about American barbarism was a lie constructed to prevent us from recognizing a society more humane than the one we were fighting for. The healing of enemy wounded, a requirement under the Geneva Conventions that America could have met with minimal compliance, instead became one of democracy's most effective demonstrations of its essential character. The military medical system that treated 137,000 German POWs did more than save lives. It saved something of Germany's future by providing a generation of influential Germans direct experience with democratic values in action." These men who expected execution instead encountered American nurses, doctors, and therapists who treated their wounds, and in doing so treated something more profound: the ideological injuries inflicted by years of Nazi indoctrination. The medicine of democracy, administered in penicillin and plasma, in surgical skill and rehabilitation persistence, accomplished what no propaganda campaign could have achieved, providing irrefutable lived evidence that humanitarian values represented not weakness but profound strength.